Well, this is the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they reach us here at Sky Centre. So let's see what's in those headlines with the broadcaster and former MP Anna Soubry and the Mail on Sunday commentator Dan Hodges. They're going to be with us right through until midnight. Before we have a chat, and it is good to see you both, by the way, let's just have a look at those front pages for you. We'll start with the Telegraph. It reports that the government intends to allow double-vaccinated US and EU citizens to travel into the UK without restriction from August the 16th. The Guardian leads on tomorrow's expected announcement on a quarantine waiver for double-jabbed US and EU arrivals. And the Times also leading on borders and how they could open up for the double-vaccinated as early as next week, it says. Whereas the Express leads with the suggestion the bulk of the pandemic could be behind us by October. The Metro tells us the story of 34-year-old Matthew Keenan, who'd refused the COVID vaccine before contracting the virus and later told his doctors that he wished he'd had the jab. He died yesterday. The Financial Times carries a warning from the International Monetary Fund that the limited access that developing nations have to vaccines is going to hinder any global economic recovery. And the Mail has spoken to an unnamed senior minister who describes the pandemic as being all over, bar the shouting. So let's talk through some of those with Anna and Dan. It is good to see you both. Let's kick off with that comment in the Mail, should we? That this pandemic is all over, bar the shouting. Anna?
Well, I wish it was. I'm with the Prime Minister, perhaps for once, by saying I think we've got to be really cautious about this. I mean, you can't deny that the number of the infection rate is going down. Deaths, of course, are going up. But the Mail is reporting, as you can see, that a senior unnamed minister, no surprise, claims it's all over, bar the shouting. Well, it isn't all over. And I still think we have to be very cautious, especially coming into September when the schools go back. So I think caution, let's wait and see. Wish it were all over, bar the shouting, but I think we've got a bit of a way to go yet. And the other thing is, of course, is that we've got to be very careful with these messages because we still want people to get either their second vaccination or to go and get both. That includes, obviously, the first one, to go out and get that vaccination. So it's really important that the messaging is right here, and I don't think the Mail helps.
I mean, it's extraordinary, Dan, isn't it, that a senior minister would say this when the Prime Minister himself is busy telling us that we still need to apply a great deal of caution.
Yes, on one level, but on another level, let's think about where we are. I mean, last week, the government announced that we were formally going to make the final step out of lockdown. Obviously, if you remember, for weeks, ministers, including the Prime Minister, were saying we wouldn't take that final step unless the data supported that move. Obviously, there were some quite scary-looking figures in terms of infections, but in terms of hospitalizations and death rates, obviously any death is tragic, but in terms of hospitalizations and death rates, they were well within the parameters that ministers themselves had set when they set out the roadmap. And frankly, and I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago, I don't actually understand why we had this sudden sort of crisis of confidence from Boris just at the point that we unlocked. That the reality is, as I said, we were given a roadmap by the government. The government's followed it. The plan seems to have worked. Crucially, we were all told that if people continued to get vaccinated, particularly in those most vulnerable groups, the over 50s, then that was the route out of this crisis. We have very high levels of vaccination amongst those groups. And I think whilst, I agree with that, obviously there needs to be a degree of caution. I do also think now that we need to start to move beyond this sense of national crisis that we've all been living under for the last 18 months. We all know, if God forbid another variant comes sweeping along, that will change the dynamic. But I do think now we have to stop living, as I say, under this mood of perpetual crisis and sort of perpetual foreboding that this blanket that's been sitting across the nation for the last 18 months, because I just don't think it's sustainable.
Meanwhile, Anna, I mean, the Metro is focusing on the case of one particular vaccine skeptic. I mean, which hammers home the message pretty hard as you can, really, just how important it is.
Absolutely. I mean, this young man, I think we'd all agree, he's in his 30s, Matthew Keenan. He was a skeptic. He was 34. He was a skeptic, so he didn't get jabbed. He then got COVID. He was so ill, he went into hospital. He went into intensive care. There's a photograph, as you can see on the front page of the Metro, of him with getting oxygen. And he said to his doctors, I wish I had got jabbed, because it had hit him, as we know it can. Yes, it's rare, but it can still affect even young people like him, like Matthew. And of course, it's killed him. So, I still think we should be cautious. And I think that message of go and get a jab, grab a jab, is absolutely critical, especially in the young, because it will spread it. And, in crude terms, that's what herd immunity is all about. When you run out of hosts, you run out of bodies. So if we all get jabbed, and we will hasten that day.
Yeah. Look, let's have a look at the Telegraph, Dan, can we? Because this actually is a really important move, isn't it? If we're expecting this announcement tomorrow about who can come into the UK without having to quarantine, and potentially we're told the UK government is going to allow US and EU citizens in.
Yeah, and again, that's part of what I was just talking about. I mean, in terms of the policy decisions that are being taken, they're all moving in one direction. And I think part of the problem we've had over the last couple of weeks is that the policy decisions we've been getting from the government and the rhetoric we've been getting from the government have been completely divergent. So on the one hand, we've been saying, we're lifting restrictions on social distancing. You can go back to pubs, you can go back to clubs, you can go back to work, etc. But don't, has effectively been the message. And I do think that's confused people. I think that's scared people. And I think worst of all, that has undermined confidence in the messaging that we've been getting from ministers and from the medical experts. And I think this move that's being outlined in the papers tomorrow again moves us, underlines the fact that certainly as far as ministers are concerned, we are now, given all the caveats that we've talked about and the need that everybody needs to make sure if they're offered a vaccine, they get a vaccine, that we are now moving towards the end of this crisis. And I think that is something that we should embrace rather than, continue to try and create a mood of doom and a mood of crisis.
It does seem extraordinary, Anna, that, if you've had your two Pfizer vaccines or AstraZeneca vaccines over here, go to, Spain for a holiday, you can just come back. If you've had them in Spain, you can't. You've got to come back and quarantine at the moment. It's a bit odd, isn't it?
No, that just does not make sense at all. And of course, it'll work both ways, because what we don't want is, if we're opening up and letting people in here, then we want to be in a position whereby our vaccines are also accepted and seen for what they are. I think one of the things that's going to happen is, what is the government going to do about the double jabbers, or us double jabbers, because that is now almost, well, it is the majority. Are we going to insist on some sort of passport to prove that you have had those two vaccines? Or effectively, is the government going to just say, nobody's going to have to prove anything, because we know what the stats tell us? My only caution with that is that those people who I still think should go and get a second jab, or actually get the whole thing, they need to go and do it. And what we don't want is people to think, oh, well, I don't need to do it now, because, Freedom Day genuinely is about to dawn, and the crisis is over, and therefore I won't go and get my jabs. And we do need to get everybody jabbed up. Because the other thing is that we're going to get into a period, I suspect, of having booster jabs, and then we're going to have the flu jab as well, and they'll probably put them together. So if you like, we need to sort of instill in people this idea that, getting vaccinated is now probably going to be something that we will all have to do for the foreseeable future. So we don't want to break that habit by people thinking, oh, that's it, it's all over now. You know, this thing is not going away. We're just learning to live with it.
Yeah, I mean, what do you reckon, Dan, to the idea of the fact we are going to have some sort of vaccination certification or passports, however you want to phrase it?
Well, as someone who's been double jabbed myself, I mean, I instinctively have some sympathy with what Anna's saying, but there's an important point I think that we have to remember here. You know, Anna was sitting there saying, you know, we've all got to get jabbed. You know, that wasn't the message several months ago. The message was very clear. The people who had to get jabbed and get double jabbed were those who were in the most vulnerable groups, 80 plus, 70 plus, 60 plus, 50 plus. We were specifically told that once we got to that point and once we got to that levels of vaccination, then basically we had this thing beat. Nobody was wandering around 3 or 4 months ago saying, if the 20-year-olds don't get vaccinated, we're all doomed. So whilst I instinctively appreciate we all have to do our bit, I think we have got to be slightly careful about suddenly changing the narrative and changing the instructions we were giving.
I mean, let me just jump in because we're very nearly out of time. I just want Anna to comment on that because, I mean, are you aware of a narrative change, Anna?
No, sorry, I thought that it was always going to be the case that we would do it in stages. And the most vulnerable obviously would get vaccinated, and then we would go down the various age groups. And, you know, actually the debate has been whether or not children over the age of 12 should get it. So I don't think the narrative's changed at all. And actually, I have to say, I've been doing a bit of volunteering, and one of the things that I notice amongst the youngsters is they're getting vaccinated not so much for themselves, but actually for the likes of people like me who are over 60 and happen to be asthmatic. They understand the need to stop the spread of the infection, to build up this immunity across the whole of society as the most important way to see off this awful thing.
So let's talk Olympics, should we? Because we've got an awful lot to celebrate. I think if we look at the top of the metro, we can see Tom Dean, who beat COVID twice, has now got his Olympic gold. We've got a 1-2 in the swimming freestyle 200 metres. I mean, we've finally got underway, Anna, and we're belting it.
It's brilliant, isn't it? It's the boost we all need, and I just think it's great, and I love watching it. I'm not going to say I can stay up as late as I know you have to, but no, I mean, these are a superb team of very young athletes, no doubt inspired, as I think you were reporting earlier on in your news bulletins, by our successors and our hosting of the London Games. And it's an absolute joy to behold. The only sorrow of it all is that, of course, their families can't be with them. But hell, haven't we enjoyed watching the videos of Tom Dean's family all celebrating his great success? So, yeah, just what we need. It's great.
Yeah, what do you reckon, Dan? It is a it's kind of phrase, a shot in the arm for all of us, isn't it?
Well, you know what? I'm going to be perfectly honest here. I was just about to lie my arse off there and completely agree with Anna. I've got to be honest. I haven't watched any. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I really just haven't been able to get into this Olympics. I don't know what it is. I don't know. I mean, I got completely caught up in the Euros. It may be COVID. It may be it just caught up. I could sit here. I could lie to you and say I've been sitting up at 3 a.m. cheering on the synchronized swimming and the dressage. I've got to be honest, I haven't really got into it. I hope I will. Maybe you'll inspire me to now. But up until
Dan,
now,
you've got to watch the surfing.
It's not.
You've got to watch the surfing. You've got to.
The surfing.
I even watched the surfing.
I didn't even know there was surfing.
Yeah, and the guy that won it actually broke his board. You might have thought he would have broken his leg, but he didn't. He broke his board. Even I was cheering. I don't care what country they are. Cheering them all on. It was brilliant.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for it. I know what you mean, Dan. There's some of the atmosphere and things just isn't there at the moment. But when we, it's our best Olympic start ever, we're doing something right, which is really good to know.